The massive starship, Fenrir's Pride, drifted through the Kepler system like a dying whale, its once proud hull now grotesquely distorted by countless alien growths. Captain Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the observation deck's reinforced glass, studying the vessel that had sent the most unusual distress call in her 15 years of deep space medicine. "Jesus Christ," muttered her assistant, Dr. Marcus Webb, joining her at the window. "What the hell happened to that thing?" The Wolf ship was enormous, easily 3 times the size of their medical frigate. Its sleek, predatory design had been inspired by the wolves of the Lupus Confederation's homeworld, but now the elegant curves were buried beneath millions of writhing, shell-like parasites. The creatures covered every surface, creating a living, breathing nightmare that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "Barnacle analogs," Elena said, consulting her tablet. "According to the transmission, they call them death shells. Been growing on their ships for months now, spreading faster than they can remove them." The distress call had come through 3 days ago, transmitted on an emergency frequency that cut through the usual diplomatic channels. The message was simple but desperate. The Wolf King of the Lupus Confederation was dying, and they needed human medical expertise. It was unprecedented. The Lupus had never asked for help from any other species, let alone the relatively young human race they considered barely evolved primates. "Captain Vasquez," came a voice over the intercom. "We're receiving another transmission from the Lupus vessel." "Put it through to my quarters," Elena replied, already heading for the lift. As the chief medical officer of the Terran Emergency Response Corps, she'd dealt with dozens of alien species, but the Lupus remained an enigma. They were warriors, proud and isolated, ruling over a confederation of star systems through strength and honor codes that humans barely understood. In her quarters, Elena activated the communication array. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a figure that made her breath catch. The alien standing before her was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with the distinctive lupine features of his species. But where there should have been silver-gray fur and bright amber eyes, she saw only suffering. The Wolf King's fur was patchy and dull, falling out in clumps to reveal skin that was angry red and covered in weeping sores. Hundreds of small, shell-like creatures clung to his arms and torso, their tiny mouths constantly feeding. His breathing was labored, and when he spoke, his voice was a raspy whisper that barely carried the authority she'd heard stories about. "Human healer," he began, using the formal address. "I am Arcturus, first of the Great Pack, ruler of the 7 systems. We require your assistance." Elena had expected arrogance, perhaps barely concealed disgust at having to ask humans for help. Instead, she heard something she never thought she'd hear from a Lupus leader: humility born of desperation. "Your Majesty," she replied, using the closest human equivalent to his title. "I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez. We received your distress call." "Can you tell me more about your condition?" Arcturus's ears flattened against his skull, a sign of deep shame among his people. 3 months ago, our fleet encountered a derelict vessel in the Void sector. We thought it abandoned, ripe for salvage. Instead, it was infected. These creatures, these death shells, they spread faster than any plague we have known. They consume the living metal of our ships, but worse, He paused, clearly struggling with the admission. "They feast upon my people, upon me." Elena leaned forward, studying the creatures covering his body. They were unlike anything in her medical databases. Each one was roughly the size of a human thumbnail, with a chitinous shell that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Tiny tendrils extended from their undersides, clearly embedded in the Wolf King's flesh. "How many of your people are affected?" she asked. "All of us," Arcturus replied simply. "The entire crew of 1,500, but His voice broke slightly. I am the worst afflicted. Perhaps because I was first to board the infected vessel. Perhaps because my blood calls to them somehow. They multiply upon me faster than upon the others. Elena felt her professional instincts kick in, overriding her awe at speaking to one of the most powerful beings in known space. We need to dock immediately. I'll need to examine you and run tests on these organisms. Arcturus shook his massive head. Too dangerous. If these creatures spread to your ship, to your people... That's a risk I'm willing to take, Elena interrupted, but we'll take precautions. My team is prepared for hostile biological entities. The Wolf King stared at her for a long moment, his alien features unreadable. Why? He finally asked. Why would you risk your small ship, your people for us? We have never been allies. Some among your kind might even call us enemies. Elena considered her words carefully. The Lupus were indeed not allies. They were distant, occasionally hostile neighbors who viewed humans as an inferior species that had stumbled into spaceflight by accident, rather than earning it through conquest and honor as they had. But looking at this proud being reduced to such suffering, she found only one answer. Because you're sick, she said simply, and I'm a doctor. Something shifted in Arcturus's expression, a flicker of what might have been surprise, or perhaps respect. Very well, human healer. We will prepare Docking Bay 7 for your arrival. But know this, if your people become infected because of us, I will carry that shame until my death. The transmission ended, leaving Elena staring at the empty holographic space. She'd treated alien dignitaries before, even members of species that were technically hostile to humanity, but never under circumstances like these. The Wolf King wasn't just another patient. He was the absolute ruler of a confederation that controlled nearly 50 inhabited worlds and commanded a fleet that could glass human colonies if he chose. Ma'am? Dr. Webb appeared at her door. The crew's asking about docking procedures. The engineering team says they've never seen anything like those parasites. Elena gathered her equipment, running through mental checklists of containment protocols and treatment possibilities. Full hazmat protocols for the entire team. I want airlocks sealed and sterilized between each transit. And Marcus? Bring every anti-parasitic compound we have, plus the experimental treatments from the Centauri trials. You think those will work on alien biology? I don't know, Elena admitted, checking her medical scanner's power levels. But I'm about to find out. The docking process took 3 hours, with both ships' engineering teams working to establish a sterile connection. Elena watched through the monitors as the Wolf King's crew prepared to receive them. The Lupus were impressive beings even when healthy, tall, powerful, with the grace of natural predators. But now they moved with the careful, pained gait of the chronically ill. When the airlock finally opened, Elena got her first real look at the extent of the infestation. The Lupus ship's corridors, which should have been pristine metal and crystal, were covered in a thick mat of the barnacle-like creatures. They lined the walls like living wallpaper, their shells clicking softly as they moved. The sound was barely audible, but when multiplied by millions, it created an unsettling susurrus that echoed through the ship. A Lupus officer met them at the airlock, his formal military bearing barely concealing his obvious discomfort. Like all his people, he was covered in the parasites, though not as heavily as their king. Dr. Vasquez, he said in accented but clear English, I am General Redhawk, First Claw of His Majesty's Guard. The king awaits you in the medical bay. They walked through corridors that should have been imposing and grand. The Lupus were master shipbuilders, and their vessels were works of art as much as instruments of war. But now Elena could barely make out the underlying architecture beneath the writhing mass of parasites. The creatures seemed to watch them as they passed, tiny eyes glinting in the bioluminescent patterns that rippled across their shells. General, Elena asked as they walked, Have you tried any treatments? Surgical removal? Chemical sterilization? Red Hawk's ears flicked back in what Elena recognized as frustration. Everything we could think of, Doctor. Remove them surgically and 2 more grow in each one's place within hours. Chemical treatments only make them burrow deeper. They seem to feed on our attempts to destroy them. They reached the medical bay, and Elena's breath caught. The Wolf King lay on a medical platform designed for his massive frame, but he seemed shrunken now, diminished. The parasites covering his body were larger and more active than those she'd seen on the others, their shells a deeper, more vibrant color. Some were the size of her fist, and she could see the complex root systems they'd grown into his flesh. "Your Majesty," she said, approaching slowly, "I'm going to need to run some scans, take samples. It may be uncomfortable." Arcturus opened his eyes, and Elena was struck by the intelligence there, the sharp mind that still burned despite his body's condition. "Do what you must, human healer. I am beyond caring about discomfort." Elena began her examination, using scanners designed for xenobiology to peer beneath the shells of the creatures. What she found made her frown. "Marcus, look at this," she called, indicating a reading on her scanner. "These aren't just parasites, they're connected somehow. See this neural network?" Dr. Webb studied the display, his face growing pale behind his helmet's visor. "They're sharing information. Each individual organism is connected to the others through some kind of biological internet." "More than that," Elena muttered, adjusting her scanner's frequency. "They're learning. Every time the king's immune system tries to attack them, they adapt, share the information with the entire colony. That's why traditional treatments aren't working." Arcturus raised his head slightly. "You understand them?" "I'm beginning to," Elena replied, her mind racing through possibilities. "But understanding them and treating them are 2 different things. I need to run more tests, analyze their biology. It's going to take time." "Time I may not have," the Wolf King said quietly. "Our medical staff estimates I have perhaps days before the creatures consume enough of my circulatory system to cause total organ failure." Elena felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She wasn't just treating a patient now. She was potentially preventing a succession crisis that could destabilize an entire confederation. If Arcturus died, there would be a power struggle among the lupus clans that could spill over into human space. "I'm not going to let that happen," she said firmly. "Your Majesty, I need you to trust me. What I'm about to do has never been attempted on lupus physiology before." Arcturus's amber eyes met hers. "Human healer, at this point, I would trust you with my life." Dr. Elena Vasquez had been working for 18 hours straight, and the laboratory she'd improvised in the Wolf King's medical bay looked like a war zone. Sample containers filled with squirming parasites lined every surface. Her diagnostic equipment hummed constantly, and the acrid smell of chemical analysis hung in the recycled air. "The neural network is more complex than we thought," Dr. Webb reported, studying a holographic display of the parasite's internal structure. "These things aren't just connected to each other, they're connected to their host's nervous system. They're reading the Wolf King's bioelectric patterns." Elena paused in her examination of a particularly large specimen, one she'd carefully extracted from Arcturus's shoulder. The creature was still alive, its tiny legs moving frantically as it searched for its host. "Reading them how?" "Like a biological computer virus," Marcus replied, his voice tight with exhaustion. "They tap into pain receptors, monitor stress hormones, even access memory centers. They know when their host is planning to fight them before the host does." From the medical platform, Arcturus spoke without opening his eyes. "You speak of them as though they possess intelligence." "They do," Elena confirmed grimly. "Not individual intelligence, more like a collective consciousness. Each parasite is essentially a neuron in a massive brain that spans your entire ship. She gestured to the walls, where thousands of the creatures pulsed in synchronized patterns. They're not just feeding on your people, Your Majesty. They're learning from you. The implications were staggering. Elena had treated parasitic infections before, but never anything that could adapt this quickly to countermeasures. Every treatment she'd attempted had been met with swift resistance. Anti-parasitic drugs that should have killed the creatures only made them burrow deeper and reproduce faster. Surgical removal triggered an immune response that made new parasites grow with metallic shells resistant to their tools. "There has to be a weakness," she muttered, studying the brain scans she'd taken of the Wolf King. "Every biological system has vulnerabilities." General Redhawk entered the medical bay, his armor clanking softly as he moved. The proud warrior looked haggard, his usually pristine uniform stained with the secretions from his own parasite load. "Doctor, we've received word from the outer colonies. The infection has spread to 3 more ships in our fleet." Arcturus's eyes snapped open, and for a moment, Elena saw the full force of the personality that commanded 50 worlds. "Which ships?" "The Blood Moon, the Star Hunter, and—" Redhawk's voice faltered. "The Den Mother, sire. The nursery ship." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Elena had learned enough about Lupus society to know what this meant. The Den Mother carried their children, their future. If the parasites had reached the young— "How many cubs?" Arcturus demanded, struggling to sit up despite the pain it clearly caused him. 237, Your Majesty, ages 3 to 15 standard years." Elena watched the Wolf King's face cycle through emotions, rage, despair, and finally a cold determination that made her shiver. "Doctor," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "I am no longer concerned with my own survival. Tell me you can find a way to save my people, my children." The weight of responsibility threatened to crush her. Elena had signed up for emergency medicine, not genocide prevention. But looking at this proud being reduced to begging for the lives of children, she felt something harden inside her chest. "I need to study a live parasite while it's attached to neural tissue," she said finally. "But the procedure would be extremely dangerous for you." "Explain," Arcturus commanded. Elena pulled up a holographic display of his brain, highlighting areas where the parasite's root systems had penetrated deepest. "I need to map exactly how they interface with your nervous system. But to do that, I'd have to insert microprobes directly into your brain while the creatures are attached. One wrong move and I could cause permanent brain damage or death." The Wolf King didn't hesitate. "Do it." "Your Majesty," General Redhawk protested, "surely there must be another way." "There is no time for another way," Arcturus cut him off. "Doctor, how long would the procedure take?" 6 hours, maybe 8, Elena replied, already running through the surgical protocols in her mind. "And I'd need to use experimental nanoprobes that have never been tested on lupus physiology." Arcturus lay back down on the medical platform. "Then we begin now." Elena spent 2 hours preparing, modifying her neurosurgical equipment for the unique challenges of lupus anatomy. Their brains were larger than human brains, with a different structure that prioritized instinct and pack coordination over abstract reasoning. The parasites seemed to know this, concentrating their deepest infiltrations in areas that controlled social behavior and loyalty. "It's diabolical," she murmured to Dr. Webb as they calibrated the nanoprobes. "They're not just feeding on him physically, they're attacking the very neural pathways that make him a leader." The surgery began with Elena making the smallest possible incision in the Wolf King's skull, just large enough to insert the hair-thin probes. Arcturus had refused anesthesia, claiming he needed to remain conscious to help interpret what she was finding. "First probe is in position," Elena reported, watching the readings on her monitor. I'm seeing massive neural activity in the pack bonding centers. The parasites have grown root structures directly into the emotional processing centers. What does that mean? Marcus asked, monitoring Arcturus's vital signs. It means they're not just reading his thoughts, Elena replied, her voice tight with concentration. They're influencing them, making him feel isolated, cut off from his pack. It's psychological warfare. On the medical platform, Arcturus let out a low growl that was part pain, part recognition. Yes, he said through gritted teeth. For weeks now, I have felt disconnected, as though my people were strangers. I thought it was the illness, but it's them, Elena confirmed, watching the nanoprobes feed. They're trying to break your connection to your pack, probably making you doubt yourself, question your decisions. She guided the probe deeper, following the parasite root systems through the complex folds of lupus brain tissue. What she found made her gasp. Marcus, are you seeing this? On the monitor, a three-dimensional map of the parasite network appeared. It wasn't random. There was a clear pattern, a design that spoke of intelligence far beyond what they'd suspected. They're not just individual parasites, Elena breathed. They're organs of a single massive organism. And this organism is trying to take control of the Wolf King's mind. The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. This wasn't just an infection, it was an invasion. Some alien intelligence was using these creatures to systematically take over the Lupus Confederation from within, starting with their leader. Can you stop them? Arcturus asked, his voice strained but determined. Elena studied the neural map, her mind racing through possibilities. The parasite network was incredibly complex, but it had one crucial weakness. It was centralized. All the individual creatures were connected to a primary node, a master parasite that coordinated the others. Maybe, she said slowly, but it would require something I've never attempted before. Tell me, the Wolf King commanded. Elena pulled up a new display, showing the electrical patterns in his brain. The parasites are using your own neural pathways to communicate with each other, but neural pathways work both ways. If I can isolate the master parasite and then send a targeted electromagnetic pulse through your nervous system, you could fry the entire network, Dr. Webb finished, his eyes widening. But Elena, that kind of electromagnetic pulse in a living brain, it's never been done. The risk of permanent damage or death is acceptable, Arcturus said firmly. What chance of success? Elena was quiet for a long moment, running calculations in her head. Honestly, maybe 30%. And even if it works, I don't know what the electromagnetic pulse will do to your brain. You could lose memories, motor function, personality changes. The Wolf King was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if the parasites were influencing his decision-making. Finally, he spoke. Doctor, in my culture, we have a saying, better to die as a wolf than live as prey. If there is a chance this will save my people, my cubs, then we attempt it. Your Majesty, please, General Redhawk pleaded. If you die, the Confederation falls into chaos. The clan wars will tear us apart. Arcturus turned his head to look at his loyal general, and Elena saw something in his eyes that made her throat tight. Old friend, if these creatures succeed in their plan, there will be no confederation to fall apart. They will have turned us into puppets, slaves to some alien intelligence we cannot even comprehend. Death is preferable to that fate. Elena found herself thinking about her oath as a doctor. First, do no harm. But what constituted harm in a situation like this? Letting the Wolf King die would doom his people to slavery. Attempting the procedure might kill him but could save millions. It was a choice no medical school had prepared her for. If we're going to do this, she said finally, we need to do it now. The parasites are learning from our conversation. I can see them adapting already. Elena spent the next hour recalibrating her equipment, turning her medical scanners into weapons of neurosurgery. She would need to generate an electromagnetic pulse precise enough to destroy the parasite network without killing their patient. "Ready?" she asked, her hand hovering over the activation switch. Arcturus closed his eyes. Ready. The pulse lasted only microseconds, but Elena watched it propagate through the Wolf King's nervous system like lightning. On her monitors, the parasite network lit up like a Christmas tree, then went dark, section by section, as the electromagnetic energy fried their delicate neural connections. For a terrifying moment, Arcturus's vital signs flatlined. Then, slowly, his heart began beating again, his breathing resumed, and his brain activity stabilized. "Your Majesty?" Elena called softly. The Wolf King's eyes opened, and Elena felt her breath catch. They were clear, alert, more alive than she'd seen them since her arrival. "Doctor," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in months, "I believe you have just performed a miracle." Around them, the parasites were beginning to fall from the walls, their shells clicking against the deck plating as they died. The creatures attached to Arcturus's body had gone rigid, their root systems withdrawing from his flesh. "Marcus, check the other crew members," Elena ordered, hardly daring to hope. Dr. Webb activated his communicator, connecting to the ship's medical systems. After a few minutes, his face broke into a grin. "Elena, you did it! Parasite activity is dropping throughout the ship. They're dying." But Elena wasn't ready to celebrate yet. "We need to check the other ships, especially the nursery ship, and we need to make sure none of the creatures survived." Over the next few hours, reports came in from across the Lupus fleet. The parasites were dying everywhere, their collective intelligence shattered by the destruction of the master network in the Wolf King's brain. The children on the Den Mother were safe, the infection cleared from their small bodies without the invasive procedures that would have been necessary for adults. As Elena finally allowed herself to rest, sitting in the observation lounge while her equipment ran final scans, Arcturus joined her. The Wolf King moved with his old grace now, the parasite's drain on his energy gone. His fur was already beginning to grow back, and the sores on his skin were healing with the remarkable speed of lupus physiology. "Doctor," he said, settling into a chair designed for his massive frame, "my people and I owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Elena shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, Your Majesty. I did what any doctor would do." Arcturus studied her with those intelligent amber eyes. "No, human healer. What you did today, it required courage that few possess. You risked not just your own life, but the diplomatic relations between our peoples. If I had died on your operating platform, there would have been those among my kind who blamed humanity for my death." "The thought occurred to me," Elena admitted. "But sometimes you have to take risks to do what's right." The Wolf King was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the formal cadence she'd heard in diplomatic transmissions. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, know that from this day forward, you and your people have the friendship of the Lupus Confederation. Your courage and skill have saved not just my life, but the lives of all my people. This debt will be remembered for 1,000 generations." Elena felt the weight of history settling around them. Whatever else happened in her career, she would always be the human doctor who saved the Wolf King and changed the relationship between their species forever. Elena almost smiled at that. "Funny thing, Your Majesty, that's exactly what you're doing." 6 weeks after the parasite crisis, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the Grand Council chamber of the Lupus flagship, Alpha's Den, watching something that no human had ever witnessed before, a full gathering of the Wolf King's advisors, with a human present as an honored guest rather than a prisoner or curiosity. The chamber was magnificent, carved from a single piece of crystalline asteroid and polished to mirror brightness. Lupus nobles from across the Confederation filled the tiered seating, their formal robes displaying the heraldry of their various clans. At the center sat Arcturus, completely recovered from his ordeal and radiating the authority that had made him undisputed ruler of 50 worlds. "The investigation into the derelict vessel has been completed," General Redhawk announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "What we found confirms Dr. Vasquez's analysis of the parasite's true nature." Elena had spent weeks analyzing the data from the infected ship, working alongside Lupus scientists to understand the full scope of what they'd faced. The results had been more terrifying than anyone had imagined. "The vessel originated from beyond our mapped space," Redhawk continued, "from a region the ancient star charts call the Dead Zone. It was not abandoned as we first believed, but was sent deliberately. A biological weapon designed to infiltrate and conquer our Confederation." Murmurs arose from the assembled nobles, the sound like distant thunder. Elena had learned to read Lupus body language over the past weeks, and she could see fear in their rigid postures, anger in their flattened ears. Arcturus raised a hand, and immediate silence fell. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, "please share with my council what your analysis revealed about our enemy." Elena stepped forward, still slightly awed by the circumstance. A month ago, these beings would have considered her barely worthy of notice. Now they listened with the respect normally reserved for their highest military commanders. "The parasites were engineered," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her audience. "Not evolved naturally, but created as weapons. Their collective intelligence was designed with one purpose: to infiltrate and control civilizations through their leaders." She activated a holographic display that showed the parasite network structure they'd discovered. "The master parasites don't just control their host's mind. They download their memories, their knowledge, their entire understanding of their civilization's weaknesses. Then they transmit this information elsewhere." "To whom?" demanded General Ironheart, the scarred commander of the Lupus Third Fleet. "We don't know," Elena admitted, "but the transmission patterns suggest a civilization far more advanced than anything we've encountered. The parasites were just scouts, preparing the way for something much worse." The implications hung heavy in the chamber's crystal air. Somewhere in the unexplored depths of space, an alien intelligence had been studying the Lupus Confederation, learning their military capabilities, their political structure, their cultural weaknesses. The Wolf King's infection hadn't been random. It had been a deliberate strike at the heart of their civilization. Arcturus stood, his massive frame commanding attention. "This threat extends beyond our borders," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "If these creatures could reach us, they can reach any spacefaring civilization, including humanity." Elena had come to the same conclusion during her analysis. The parasite's design was too sophisticated, too adaptable to be limited to targeting just one species. They were a universal weapon, capable of infiltrating any biological civilization. "Your Majesty," said Chancellor Red Moon, the eldest of the Wolf King's advisors, "surely you do not suggest we warn our competitors of this threat." The old prejudices died hard among the Lupus nobility. They had considered humans an inferior species for so long that even after Elena's heroism, many still struggled to accept them as equals. Arcturus's amber eyes fixed on the Chancellor with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. "I suggest, old friend, that you remember who saved not just my life but the lives of every cub on the Den Mother. Dr. Vasquez risked everything for people she had never met, for a species that had shown her kind nothing but disdain." The Wolf King began to pace, a habit Elena had noticed he employed when making important decisions. "More than that, her people possess something we lack, medical knowledge that proved superior to our own. If these parasites attack humanity, they may develop countermeasures that could save us all. Elena felt the political currents shifting around her. She was witnessing the birth of an alliance that would reshape the balance of power in this corner of the galaxy. But she was also aware of the resistance from some quarters. "The humans are weak," growled General Ironheart. "Their ships are small, their weapons inferior. What alliance could they offer that we would need?" Elena had expected this challenge. She'd learned enough about Lupus society to know that strength was their ultimate measure of worth. But she'd also learned that they respected cunning and innovation. "General," she said, stepping forward, 3 months ago, your most advanced medical technology couldn't cure the Wolf King. A single human doctor working with equipment you considered primitive not only saved his life, but eliminated a threat to your entire confederation." She gestured to the holographic display, where the parasite analysis continued to scroll. "Your people are strong, magnificent warriors. But these enemies don't fight with claws and fangs. They fight with biology, with subtlety, with patience that spans centuries. To defeat them, you need allies who think differently than you do." General Ironheart's eyes narrowed, but Elena saw grudging respect there. Among the Lupus, a well-delivered challenge was almost as valued as physical prowess. Arcturus stopped pacing, his decision made. "The alliance will proceed," he announced. "General Redhawk, you will accompany Dr. C. Vasquez to Earth to begin formal negotiations. We will share our knowledge of this threat with humanity, and we will coordinate our defenses." "Your Majesty," Chancellor Redmoon protested, "the clan councils have not approved—" "The clan councils," Arcturus interrupted, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, "will approve what their king commands, or they will find new representation on this council." The threat was unmistakable, and Elena saw several of the nobles shift uncomfortably in their seats. But she also saw nods of agreement from others, particularly the younger members who had less invested in the old prejudices. Over the following days, Elena worked with Lupus diplomats to prepare for what would be the most important first contact mission in human history. Not first contact itself. Humans and Lupus had known of each other for decades. But the first time their species would meet as potential allies rather than suspicious neighbors. The night before their departure, Arcturus requested a private meeting in his quarters. Elena found him standing before a massive window that looked out into deep space, toward the region where the threat had originated. "Regrets, Your Majesty?" she asked, joining him at the window. "No," he replied simply. "But I am concerned. My people have spent centuries believing we were the apex predators of this galaxy. Learning that something out there views us as prey has been humbling." Elena studied his profile in the starlight. Over the weeks since his recovery, she'd come to understand that beneath the imperial authority and warrior's pride lay a deeply intelligent being who genuinely cared for his people. "Maybe that's not a bad thing," she said carefully. "Pride can make you overconfident, blind to real threats. Humility might keep you alive." Arcturus turned to look at her, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Wisdom from the young human doctor? Observation from someone who's seen what overconfidence can do," Elena replied. "I've treated patients who thought they were invincible right up until their bodies proved them wrong." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Finally, Arcturus spoke again. "There will be resistance on your world as well. Many humans fear us, and not without reason. We have not been diplomatic in our past interactions." Elena thought about the reports she'd read, the incidents where Lupus ships had driven off human exploration vessels, the trade disputes that had nearly escalated to warfare. "Fear works both ways, Your Majesty, but fear of a common enemy has a way of bringing people together." "Indeed," Arcturus agreed. and perhaps our peoples can learn from each other in ways that go beyond mere military alliance. Your medical knowledge, our industrial capacity, your innovation, our discipline. Together, we might become something stronger than either species alone. The next morning, Elena boarded a specially equipped diplomatic shuttle along with General Red Hawk and a small contingent of Lupus nobles. As they departed the Alpha's den, she looked back at the massive wolf ship and marveled at how much had changed in just 6 weeks. She'd come here as a doctor responding to a medical emergency. She was leaving as an architect of interstellar diplomacy, carrying the hopes of 2 civilizations in her hands. The journey to Earth took 3 weeks, during which Elena worked with the Lupus delegates to prepare their presentation to human leadership. The challenge was enormous, convincing humanity to ally with a species they'd viewed as hostile while preparing for a threat from beyond known space. When they finally emerged from hyperspace near Earth, Elena felt her breath catch. Home looked impossibly small and fragile from space, a blue marble suspended in the void. It was hard to believe that this tiny world had produced the medical knowledge that saved the Wolf King and potentially changed the balance of galactic power. The reception at the United Earth Council was everything Elena had hoped for and feared. Human diplomats struggled to maintain their composure while sitting across from beings they'd only seen in intelligence briefings. General Red Hawk, for his part, had to be reminded repeatedly to moderate his naturally intimidating presence around humans half his size. But when Elena presented the evidence of the parasitic threat, the political calculations changed rapidly. The recordings from the Lupus investigation, the biological analysis of the weapons designed to conquer civilizations, the clear evidence that Earth could be the next target. It all painted a picture that no responsible leader could ignore. The alliance was approved 3 weeks after their arrival, signed in a ceremony that was broadcast across human space and transmitted to every Lupus world. Elena found herself standing between 2 species that had viewed each other with suspicion for decades, watching them pledge mutual defense against a threat neither could face alone. In the months that followed, the collaboration exceeded everyone's expectations. Human medical technology merged with Lupus engineering to create new defensive systems. Joint research stations were established to study the parasite threat and develop countermeasures. Most importantly, the 2 species began to understand each other in ways that went far beyond mere military necessity. Elena often found herself thinking about the moment when Arcturus had asked why she would risk her ship and her people for strangers. Her answer then had been simple: because you're sick, and I'm a doctor. But the truth was more complex than that. She had seen potential where others saw only threat. She had chosen hope over fear, cooperation over isolation. And in doing so, she had helped forge an alliance that might just be strong enough to face whatever was coming from the dark spaces between the stars. Standing in her new office at the Earth Lupus Medical Research Center, Elena looked out at a facility where human and Lupus scientists worked side by side, sharing knowledge that neither species could have developed alone. It was a vision of what the galaxy could become. Not a collection of isolated civilizations competing for resources, but a community of different species working together toward common goals. The threat from the dead zone still lurked somewhere beyond the rim of explored space, but Elena felt confident that when it came, humanity and the Lupus Confederation would be ready. More than that, their alliance was already inspiring other species to reconsider their own isolationist policies. The Wolf King had been saved by human medicine, but in the end, it was the bonds between species that would save them all. And it had started with one simple principle that Elena had never forgotten. When someone is sick, you help them, no matter who they are or where they come from. That was the human way. And now, perhaps, it could become the galactic way as well.